Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever or wherever you are watching from me. It's 5:54 a.m. here in the Eastern Time Zone of the United States. It is Thursday, the 7th of August, 2025. And today we're going to finish chapter 1 of the book of Judges. In the last session, the title of it was The Continuing Conquest of Canaan, and we heard about some good stuff. And I told you in the last session that we're going to start to hear about some of the problems that Israel is causing for itself and has to this very day. So I'm going to pick up in verse 16, read through the rest of the chapter, talk a little bit about uh, what it's saying to them or about them, and then turn the mirror to us. All right. Reading from the New King James translation. Now the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south near Arid. And they went and dwelt among the people. And Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited Zephath and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Also, Judah took Gaza and its territory, Ashkelon and with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers. But they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of iron. And they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said, then expelled from there the three sons of Anak. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day, and that's to the day that this was written. And the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. So the house of Joseph sent men to spy out Bethel. The name of the city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to him, "Please show us the inheritance of the entrance to the city, and we will show you mercy." So he showed them the entrance to the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. However, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in the land. And it came to pass, when Israel was strong, that they put the Canaanites under tribute, but did not completely drive them out. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, so the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so the Canaanites dwell among them and were put under tribute. Nor did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Akkah, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or the inhabitants of Alub, Agzib, Helba, Aphek, or Rehob. So the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites and the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. Nor did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, or the inhabitants of Beth Anath, but they dwelt among the Canaanites and the inhabitants of the land. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath were put under tribute to them. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan, into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. And the Amorites were determined to dwell in Mount Heres, in Aijalon, and in Shalbim. Yet when the strength of the house of Joseph became greater, they put them under tribute. Now the boundary of the Amorites was from the ascent of Akabim, from Selah and upward. All right, so it seems just like boring talking about places, right? And it starts with a pretty good thing that they drove out the Canaanites in this one place and utterly destroyed them. And then we start to see some issues. We do see twice, we see with Judah and with the house of Joseph, that it says, so the Lord was with them. But then it also says, but they could not drive out the inhabitants in a couple places. The first one is with Judah. They couldn't drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of iron. So you would think, okay, that kind of makes sense. They couldn't drive them out because they were really powerful. But if you just go back and look at Joshua 17:18, then he says that all of it's wooded, and you shall cut it down. The farthest extent shall be yours, and you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have iron chariots and are strong. So they were already told that God said this, and we, you go back and look at what God told them as they were going into the promised land, that they needed to wipe out everybody, that they needed to annihilate it. They need to purge the whole area of all these horrible tribes that are doing horrible, horrible things, that are unspeakable things. And you really, if you think that it's crazy that God would have these people eliminated, then you need to go back and do a little history lesson about who and what these people were. I put the name of a book, Is God a Moral Monster? The God of the Old Testament. I'm probably not saying the name of that book totally correctly, but that is a great one to go and read if you want to learn more about the times and what's going on here. But that was the start here of them compromising. They didn't drive out those people. Then we just have this long list of people groups, of cities that they didn't take out. I mean, every single tribe had places where they couldn't drive the inhabitants out. Now, in some of them, it says that they put them under tribute. That basically means they turned them into forced labor. They enslaved them, so to speak. But we're going to read, starting in chapter 2, that it's going to cause them issues. And God already warned them through Moses that it was going to cause them issues. God warned them through Joshua that it was going to cause them issues. And I've made the analogy of cancer. If you have cancer, you need to get rid of all the cancer. You leave a little bit in there, it's going to come back, and it's going to come back with a vengeance and get worse. And that is what is going to happen to Israel. So there's some lessons to Israel in here, and that incomplete conquest is something that they weren't supposed to be doing. They were supposed to completely conquer all this land, but they had an incomplete conquest. They compromised, and we're going to learn over and over again that compromise leads to consequences, and they certainly are about to suffer some consequences. Forced labor, instead of conquering the people, instead of driving them out totally, this forced labor gave them this false sense of control. We're going to learn how that didn't go so well. And for me, the things that kind of jumped off the page at me and made me think about other things in the Bible and made me kind of reflect in and of myself, I would say there's a couple sections where they say, where it's written, so the Lord was with Judah, the Lord was with Joseph, but they couldn't do things. I would say that there had to be a time where they, even though the Lord was with them, they weren't listening and they weren't trusting God fully. Because if they were listening and trusting God fully, it's already been shown that they would take care of whatever the problem, no matter how big it was. But they obviously fell away and weren't totally listening to God, because it was God that was giving them all these victories. So when it says that they couldn't conquer, that implies to me that they were trying to do that themselves. Now, why does that jump off the page at me? It's because I understand from my own life, and I hope that you understand or are coming to understand, that there are things in our lives that we just can't control. We just can't drive out in and of ourselves. God can do anything. It says it in a ton of places in the Bible. It actually says it in Luke 1:37. It says with God, all things are possible, when the angel's talking to Mary. And there's a lot of different places. Jesus said that it's harder for a rich man to get to heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. But with God, anything's possible. So we see over and over again that with God, anything's possible. I believe that means if we're walking with God, God can do anything. But in our lives, I think that our walk with God or our walk ignoring God or thinking we can do it ourselves has a huge effect on what we can do. And that goes with this. So this section about incomplete conquest, we need to realize that without Christ, or even maybe with Christ and us not walking with Christ, that we will not be able to take care of drive some of the bad things out of our lives. I will tell you, my life before Christ was a life of thinking I could do everything myself. And it was a series of crash and burns. My life early with Christ was I would walk with Christ and then I would go, I can handle this one myself. And every time I did that, every time I said I can handle this myself, it was a problem. And it was a problem for sometimes years until I turned it all over and realized, I got to do my part. But there are things that I cannot drive out, that Christ is the only one that can drive out. So I hope that you have learned that so far, and that you are taking heed to that. The things that I would challenge us with in this section is, are we listening to God? They listened to God somewhat, but they faded away because they didn't do what God had told them to do. Are we learning from what God is telling us? Are we learning the truth? Are we doing our part, but are we not trying to take over and do it all? Are we not saying, God, I got this, that's petty, or God, you're with me, so I'm going to go do whatever I want, and I can take care of it. I hope that we're not. Again, for me, every time I've done that, it has crashed and burned, and I hope for you've learned that, or you're learning that now, so you won't crash and burn. That would be my challenge that I think of when I read this part. Now, starting in chapter 2, we're going to hear about how things start falling apart from them, or for them, and again, I hope that we're learning from that. God, thank you for the blessing of you giving us your word. Thank you for teaching us the truth and teaching us that you are in control, but we can sometimes mess that up in our own lives. Lord, I just ask that you open our eyes and our hearts to show us the right way in all situations. And I pray that you give us courage to follow it. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for spending time with me today. Tomorrow we start chapter 2. See you then. Until then, have a great day.